And so I just, I at least want to make sure that I say that so that, because we don't know what the future is going to bring. Racial tensions are rising here in the United States. I call it the death throes of white supremacy. Is happening right now. There's this new technological power that can connect people. Like, we're hundreds of miles away from each other right now, but we're able to have this discussion. I'm able to talk to people. My next guest after you lives in Germany and was a former neo-Nazi who was part of like a little familial cult that relied upon a Nazi conspiracy theory, and he had to deprogram himself over several years. So we're going to talk about that. It's starting to show that there's this somewhat of a universality in terms of othering people, in terms of creating power differentials and using those power differentials, and government power using it and how they use it. And I think that the more people become educated about these hierarchies, about the history and legacy of them, and about how they operate, it's going to be more and more difficult over time for the powers that be, if you will, to control the population, to encourage them to reinforce these hierarchies. At least that's my hope. And part of the reason why I have these conversations is to just hopefully educate people and give them the option to deciding for their own personal selves and for their own personal lives that they're going to intentionally, consciously, and purposefully choose to not buy into these racial hierarchies, to not feed into them, to fight against them. And all I want for the Contraband Wagon is to allow every single person that option, that choice, because I feel like that choice has been stolen from a lot of people. I mean, thinking back to what you just said about someone growing up in Lebanon, for instance, as a Palestinian without citizenship and being relegated to that second class citizenship and living their life that way and experiencing that. I mean, of course you're going to come away with certain feelings about your situation, your lack of freedom, the dehumanization that you face, and it just creates this vicious cycle. And the only way to break the cycle is to support the people who are being suppressed against the powers that are trying to perpetuate that oppression. And if you're not doing that actively, consciously, and intentionally, then you are supporting oppression. And that's how it works. And it's very unfortunate and it's not fair. And but it's also undeniable. So I just want to bring people to the point where they recognize that undeniable truth and then allow them to make whatever choice they want, but a conscious one, not one that's made for them that they accept.
Yeah. I think that's hard with like it's hard. It's not impossible. And actually it's far from impossible. It's very doable, but I think there's a lot that has to go into it, right? And I think that exposure is one, and that's what you're doing here on the Contraband Wagon is also about having those conversations and about making people aware. Groupthink can be really hard to overcome, and I think that many of us, we have different levels of attachments. And I think when it comes to our attachment to our ethnic group or our racial group, that is something that's very powerful. And people stop being curious about other racial groups and other ethnicities or the racial hierarchy. And so it becomes very difficult to see that racial hierarchy sometimes unless you experience it yourself or if you witness others negatively impacted by that racial hierarchy. If that doesn't happen, it can become very hard, I think, to be pure or to overcome that level of thinking. But I do think that having these conversations is really important, right? Because how will Israelis, for instance, know the experiences of Palestinians unless they talk to Palestinians, unless they go to the West Bank or they go to Gaza, right? You have a lot of, like, for instance, from the pro-Israeli side. There's a lot of talk about how the the resistance amongst the Palestinians is anti-Semitic. And I don't buy that at all. I don't buy it because the only oppressor that Palestinians have ever known are Israelis who are Jews. And there is hatred and there is bigotry, but that's the only oppressor that they've ever known. And um, the onus, I think, first and foremost, is on the oppressor to stop the oppressing, but also people, though those who are in power, um, to try to better understand those who are not in power, and to broaden their minds to understand that their lived experience is not the same as others' lived experiences. So that's what I was trying to do when I was going on this, but when I was part of that program, I wanted a different perspective. I wanted the perspective of those who are in power, those who I grew up believing and hearing stories of what they did to my father's people. And the program didn't change that perspective in terms of, history and knowing where my people, on which side they were and what happened to them. But it does allow me to understand a different perspective. The guy who taught me the history of Zionism, he was talking about it so happily because what it did for him was something really positive. Yet there's a really, really dark side to that positive experience for him and his family. And that dark side is the death, destruction, and genocide of another people. So yeah, but I'm really grateful to be on this program and to be having this conversation because I think that these conversations are really important, for everybody to have. And like you're right, for me to make a conscious choice, right? Like I felt like I had to have this information and that conscious choice about how I approach this racial hierarchy, how I approach this conflict, what I think about the Israeli side of things. It was really important for me to get that experience. And I'm going to make some assumptions here, but I think that not a lot of people get that other perspective. And it's really important that you keep having these conversations, and so do I.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, I want to